In the span of a single century, the Mongols built the largest contiguous land empire in human history. They killed an estimated 40 million people, somewhere between 10 and 17% of the entire world population at the time. They erased cities so completely that some have never been found. They rewrote the map of Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe in a generation. Every man who led them was a conqueror, and every one of them died. Some fell in battle, some were betrayed, some were swallowed by the empires they built, and one, the greatest of all of them, died in a way that historians still argue about today. These are the deaths of the most infamous Mongol conquerors in history. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan had never lost a major battle, not one. In 40 years of conquest, he had defeated the Jin dynasty of China, crushed the Khwarezmian Empire, swept through Persia and into Eastern Europe, and built a war machine so efficient that entire cities surrendered without a fight just to avoid being erased. By 1227, at approximately 65 years old, he was the most powerful man who had ever lived. He was in the middle of a military campaign against the Western Xia dynasty in northwestern China when he died. That much is certain. Everything else is disputed. Here's where it gets strange. The Mongols went to extraordinary lengths to hide the circumstances of his death. His body was transported back to Mongolia in total secrecy. Anyone who encountered the funeral procession was killed. Soldiers, civilians, anyone who saw the cortege pass was executed on the spot to prevent word spreading about where he was going. The cause of death has been debated for 800 years. The official account says he fell from his horse during a hunt and died of the injuries. Other sources claim he was killed by the Western Xia, shot by an arrow, or killed during a night raid on his tent. One account, written centuries later, claims he was killed by a captured Xia princess who attacked him on their wedding night. Historians treat that version with skepticism. What happened next confirmed what the Mongols thought of him. 80 horses were driven over his burial site to obliterate any trace of the grave. His tomb has never been found. 8 centuries of searching, archaeologists, treasure hunters, satellite imaging, and nothing. The most powerful conqueror in history lies somewhere in the Mongolian steppe, and no one alive today knows exactly where. He was approximately 65 years old. His empire, at the time of his death, covered 24 million square kilometers. Everything that came after, the Mongol invasions of Europe, the destruction of Baghdad, the conquest of China, was built on the foundation he laid. He died in the middle of a campaign, which is exactly how he would have wanted it. Ögedei Khan. Ögedei Khan inherited his father's empire and immediately made it larger. Under his command, the Mongols conquered the Jin dynasty of northern China, devastated Poland and Hungary, and pushed into Austria and Germany so effectively that Western Europe came within weeks of a full-scale Mongol invasion. Then something happened that had nothing to do with any army. Ögedei drank himself to death. He had been warned repeatedly. His own advisors, his wives, his generals, all of them knew that Ögedei's appetite for alcohol was becoming dangerous. He reportedly drank from morning until he lost consciousness, every day for years. A specific incident was documented around 1234 AD where he collapsed during a military campaign, unconscious for days. His advisors attributed it to spirits. His physicians knew exactly what it was. His wife Turagan tried to limit his access to wine by stationing a guard to count his cups. Ögedei's response was to drink from larger cups. He acknowledged the problem himself, once reportedly saying he knew he drank too much but could not stop. In December 1241, the Mongol armies in Hungary and Poland were days away from pushing further west into Germany. Europe held its breath. Then word arrived from the east. Ögedei Khan was dead. The armies turned around immediately to participate in the selection of his successor. Western Europe was saved not by any army or castle or act of God, but because the Mongol emperor drank himself into a fatal collapse at the age of 55. The invasion of Europe was never resumed. Historians call it one of the most consequential deaths in medieval history. He died in his palace. He died drunk, and his death changed the course of Western civilization. Mongol Khan. Mongol Khan was the last great Khan to personally lead his armies into the field. Under his command, the Mongols launched simultaneous invasions of China, Persia, and the Middle East. His brother Hulagu destroyed Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate and killing the caliph by wrapping him in a carpet and having horses trample him to death. His other brother Kublai was pushing deeper into southern China. The empire was at its greatest extent. Mongke himself was in China, personally commanding the siege of a fortress called Diaoyu when he died in August 1259. He was approximately 50 years old. Here's where the accounts split. Chinese sources say he died of dysentery, a brutal, undignified death from infection that reduces a man to nothing over days or weeks. Other accounts, including some Mongol sources, say he was struck by a projectile during the siege, an arrow or a stone launched from the fortress walls. He died either from a common disease that killed more medieval soldiers than any battlefield weapon, or from a lucky shot by a defender in a fortress that was supposed to fall quickly. His death stopped everything. The invasion of China halted immediately. Hulagu pulled most of his forces back from the Middle East to return for the succession, which is why the Mongols lost the Battle of Ain Jalut to the Egyptian Mamluks in 1260, the first major Mongol defeat and the moment the westward expansion permanently stopped. Mongke Khan died either of dysentery or an arrow. No one recorded which with certainty. The man who commanded the largest military operation in medieval history left no confirmed cause of death. The fortress he was besieging held out for another 27 years after he died in front of it. Hulagu Khan destroyed Baghdad. In February 1258, his forces sacked the city that had been the center of Islamic civilization for 500 years. The House of Wisdom, one of the greatest libraries in the ancient world, was burned. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from the manuscripts thrown into it, then red with the blood of the dead. The last Abbasid caliph was captured, rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, because Mongol tradition held that royal blood could not be spilled on the ground. Hulagu continued west after Baghdad. He took Syria. He was pushing toward Egypt when his brother Mongke died and pulled him back east for the succession dispute. He never returned to finish the campaign. He spent his remaining years ruling the Ilkhanate, the Mongol successor state in Persia and the Middle East, and died in February 1265 at approximately 48 years old. The cause was epilepsy, or a condition that presented like it. He suffered a seizure and did not recover. Here's the dark contrast. The man who burned Baghdad, who drowned the caliph's bloodline in carpet and hooves, who turned the Tigris red, died in his bed of a medical condition. No enemy reached him. No battle claimed him. His body was buried on an island in Lake Urmia in northwestern Iran, following Mongol burial tradition. He was 48 years old. The Ilkhanate he founded survived him by 80 years before fragmenting. The city of Baghdad never fully recovered from what he did to it. Some historians argue it never has. Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China that his grandfather had started. He founded the Yuan dynasty, made himself emperor of China, and ruled from a palace in Beijing that Marco Polo described as the most magnificent building on earth. He launched naval invasions of Japan and Java. He was the most powerful ruler in Asia for 30 years. He was also a man who outlived everyone he loved, and it destroyed him. In 1281, his favourite wife Chabi died. Kublai had relied on her counsel for decades. She was not a figurehead, but a genuine political partner. He fell into a prolonged depression after her death. Then, in 1285, his chosen heir and eldest son, Zhenjin, died unexpectedly, before Kublai himself. The succession he had planned for collapsed. The man who had conquered China could not control what happened to his own. Kublai responded to grief the way his uncle Ögedei had, with food and alcohol. His weight ballooned. He developed severe gout, a condition that left him unable to walk without assistance during his final years. His legs and feet were constantly swollen and in pain. He continued trying to rule, continued launching military campaigns he was too ill to personally lead, continued eating and drinking in quantities his physicians warned him about. He died in February 1294 at 79 years old, ancient by medieval standards. The official cause was complications from gout and the obesity-related illness that had consumed his final decade. The greatest Mongol ruler after Genghis himself died bloated, in pain, having outlived his wife, his chosen heir, and most of the men who had served him. His empire fragmented within a generation of his death. The Yuan dynasty he founded was expelled from China 80 years later. The conqueror who had everything left nothing that lasted. Tamerlane, Timur, the Lame, was not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, but he spent his entire life pretending otherwise. He conquered Central Asia, Persia, the Caucasus, northern India, and the Ottoman Empire. He defeated the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I in battle and kept him in a cage. He built pyramids of skulls outside the cities he destroyed. One account claims he stacked 90,000 human heads outside the gates of Baghdad. He was the most feared man alive for 30 years. In 1404, at approximately 68 years old and in rapidly declining health, Tamerlane announced his most ambitious campaign yet. He was going to invade China. The Ming dynasty had recently expelled the Mongols, and Tamerlane considered the insult unacceptable. He assembled an army of 200,000 men and marched east in the dead of winter. Here's where it ended. The winter of 1404 to 1405 was one of the most brutal Central Asia had seen in decades. Tamerlane's army pushed through temperatures that killed horses and men in large numbers. Tamerlane himself, already ill before the campaign began, developed a severe fever somewhere near the city of Otrar in modern-day Kazakhstan. He never made it to China. On February 18th, 1405, Tamerlane died of fever and cold in his campaign tent. The man who had defeated every enemy he had ever faced, who had kept a sultan in a cage, who had built towers of skulls across 3 continents, was stopped by a Central Asian winter. He was approximately 68 years old. His body was returned to Samarkand and buried in a magnificent tomb called the Gur-e-Amir. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb to examine his remains. 2 days later, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The story that Tamerlane's tomb carried a curse warning that whoever disturbed his rest would unleash a war more terrible than any he had waged spread immediately. His remains were reburied with full Islamic rites in November 1942. Within weeks, the tide of the war on the Eastern Front began to turn at Stalingrad. 6 men who between them killed tens of millions of people, erased cities from the map, and bent the entire medieval world to their will. Genghis Khan disappeared into the steppe, tomb unfound after 8 centuries. Ogedei, killed by wine, his death saving Western Europe. Mongol, killed by dysentery or an arrow, no one recorded which. Hulagu, the destroyer of Baghdad, dead of a seizure in his bed. Kublai, the conqueror who outlived everyone he loved and ate himself to death in grief. Tamerlane, stopped by a winter when no army ever had. The greatest conquerors in history. None of them died the way you'd write it. If you want to know how the next set of legendary warriors fell, subscribe. The next video is already coming.